I'm going to start off by introducing our first panelist, and that's Rebecca Prince Ruiz. Rebecca, apologies if I didn't pronounce that correctly. Rebecca is the founder of Plastic Free July, a global movement that helps millions of people and organizations be part of the solution to plastic pollution. So Rebecca is a change maker, to say the least. An experienced public speaker, TEDx speaker, and sustainability professional who is motivated to care for people and the planet. She's the author of Plastic Free, the inspiring story of a global environmental movement and why it matters. So in 2021, Rebecca was WA's Australian of the Year, Australian of the Year local hero. And in the same year, Rebecca was also a Churchill Fellow. Now, over to our second panelist that we're also incredibly excited to have joining us today is Dr. Deborah Lau. Dr. Deborah Lau leads CSIRO's Ending Plastic Waste mission. The mission is Australia's catalyst for systemic change to tackle plastic pollution. So with over 14 years of senior research management experience at CSIRO, Rebecca has delivered impact across a diverse portfolio of projects, developing materials and processes for energy and the environment. Deborah has been nationally awarded and internationally recognized for a contribution to the field of cultural heritage and conservation science in Australia, and has recently led the first global commercialization of a novel polymer coating called MS3 that's now being used to protect the world's most valuable paintings. And third but not least is Associate Professor Thava Palanisamy. And again, Thava, I am very sorry if I've mispronounced your name in any way. Thava has published more than 100 scientific papers, including more than 25 scientific papers on environmental plastics. Thava was a panelist at the Geneva Environment Network for the United Nations Environment Program to present on plastics and health in 2021, sharing the stage with directors from the World Health Organization and the United Nations Environment Program. His research on the impacts of plastics has influenced policy changes in several countries, including the United Nations Plastics Agreement. Thava has established a global environmental plastics research alliance in 2018, and which brought together experts from 15 countries and satellite research hubs in India, Fiji, and Africa. Thava advises various government organizations in Australia on plastic-related policy changes. Now, we are hugely thrilled to welcome each of our panelists, and we're excited to learn from their wealth of knowledge and experience in their various fields of expertise. So, Rebecca, we will start with you. So many of us are clearly aware of why plastic and non-plastic single-use items are such a huge problem, for pollution and, of course, the environment. So for those who are not incredibly familiar with this arena, quickly run us through, these issues and how Plastic Free Foundation has made strides in educating and also shifting the culture of using disposables, recycling, reusing plastics in Australia and, of course, the rest of the world.
Thank you very much. Look, I don't think anyone would be listening to this webinar today unless they weren't deeply concerned about this plastics issue. And since I started Plastic Free July in 2011, there's been a huge shift in, first, awareness of the pollution issue and concern, and most importantly, action. The numbers are always overwhelming, and one of the particular problems with plastic is that despite all of our efforts, it's a growing problem. So if we continue with business as usual, projections are that plastic waste will double and pollution into the ocean will quadruple by 2040. And plastic production is increasing exponentially. And again, despite our best efforts, less than 10% of all the plastics we've ever made have been recycled. In Australia, the latest National Waste Report says about 13% of plastics in this country are being recycled. And look, that's not all plastics. That's not if we're talking about the PET drink bottles, especially if they're going through our fantastic container deposit schemes. That 100% of those are being recycled. And we know it's having severe impacts on our environment. 90% of all animal species ever studied have been affected by plastic, and it's an economic problem. It's costing us over $100 billion a year, and increasing, we're realising that it's a human health issue and also a social justice issue. When you look at the communities that are affected by plastic across the value chain and its life cycle, although I am very reluctant to use that word when it comes to plastic, but from the extraction of the fossil fuels to the production and especially the disposal. So, but as I said, a lot has changed in the last decade. And look, when I started Plastic Free July, single use was not even a term. And if we look at the change, I think it's important to reflect back on that change that I really think has come from the grassroots up, as communities and individuals and households and citizens have changed their behaviour. And we've really seen this groundswell of people making changes in their daily lives and coming together as communities, which is then putting pressure on business and government. So I think, and I'm not quite sure of this, but I believe that we're the only continent in the world where we have a lightweight plastic bag ban in every jurisdiction. And once Tasmania gets on board, come on, Tassie, we'll be also the first continent with a container deposit scheme in every jurisdiction. And these are some of the important policy levers that governments can pull. But what they are doing, and we've certainly seen a societal shift away from single-use plastics, but it's very much driven by tackling this pollution problem. And we've seen that have great effects. CSIRO's research, I'm sure Deb can talk about that, has shown that the litter on our beaches, the plastics are decreasing in this country, but we still have a waste problem. And other countries that don't have as good waste management systems have more of that pollution issue. But actually the waste that we're producing is increasing, and that leads to our greater consumption problem and a whole lot of other wider environmental issues. So perhaps I'll just leave that one there.
Yeah.
I could talk about that for hours.
I'm sure you can. Unfortunately, we only have an hour, so we have to give short and succinct answers. Now I'd like to move over to Deborah and get your get your thoughts on CSIRO, because obviously we know that CSIRO has the most advanced research capabilities for plastic recycling, and the Ending Plastics Waste mission has a target of reducing plastic waste entering Australia, a target of 80% by 2030. So briefly take us through your plan for this, your strategy, and what the newest recycling technologies are and how you plan to scale.
Great, thanks, Nina. And yes, we do have a mission in CSIRO, and what's part of our missions program, which is really designed to address the really big challenges that are facing us economically and environmentally and socially. And I don't think there's anyone on this call who wouldn't be aware of the magnitude of the problem that plastic waste presents. And so our mission is really about gathering forces and harnessing that collective energy across the Australian research community. Almost every single university in Australia and a large proportion of our public research organisations do have programs of work that are actually addressing plastic waste research and the problem of plastic pollution. So it's not something that CSIRO is doing alone. We're really looking to catalyse and support, and where we can coordinate significant efforts so that can be most effective. So because there is a lot of research that's happening and underway, we've, I suppose, focused on a few areas of technology in terms of specific technologies as well as right around the plastics ecosystem in terms of social science, behavioural science, looking at materials flows and pathways. But I think your question sort of was really about some new technologies for recycling, which is really only one element of the big picture. But some of those things involve new technologies for designing in reversibility. So for polymers that might be cross-linked, that can't easily be reprocessed thermally. We're looking at how we can actually turn those cross links within the polymer structure off and on with particular triggers. We're also looking at new technologies for decomposing the polymers. So things like enzymes, microbes, even insects, because we know that certain insects like black soldier flies and mealworms, their larvae can actually digest and consume that plastic, and then they can be those insects can be used for other products as well. So there's a whole raft of different technologies, but they're really only one part of the big picture.
Okay.
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we'll speak to Salva. And Salva, briefly explain where microplastics come from for those that are unfamiliar, and then talk us through how microplastics enter our bodies and how it affects human health based on your research. I think
Thank you,
you're
Nina. Apologies for a couple of minutes late, technology hiccup.
okay.
Yeah. So yes, previous panels outlined on the width and breadth of plastic problem. Over 390 million metric tons of plastic produced per year, and 50% of them are produced for single use, resulting in a quick growing burden of plastic waste. And so when it comes to microplastic, in scientific world, it's broadly categorized into two groups. One is primary microplastic, another one is secondary microplastic. Primary microplastic are intentionally produced in a tiny size. When I say microplastic, it is operationally defined as less than 5 millimeter size. It's smaller than your fingernail. And secondary microplastics are when the large plastics break down due to environmental and biological effect, then it produces the microplastic. So that's called secondary microplastics. And these microplastics, I have not come across a plastic product that can not or will not produce microplastic. Every plastic you make going to produce microplastics. Okay, so and these microplastics are predominant form of ocean plastic debris, and mostly secondary microplastics. So, and the other group which is not yet accounted properly is nanoplastic, which is invisible, and you need very advanced technologies to see that. And these are the sizes. The nanoplastic 1/1,000,000th of your hair is the one toxicologically relevant particle sizes when you're talking about entering food chain and human health. And these plastic, because of the smaller in size, it can enter small organisms and then get into the other food chain and then all the way to our diet. So this is the major problem of microplastics. Once enter in a starting food chain like primary producers, then it's all the way get into our human body. And this was not realized when plastic was invented. So it should have been apparent what is the material durability, where it goes, and then where it is managed, how it is managed. And this has been the problem. These small particles have the potential to enter our food chain and then comes back to our diet. And we have also published various sources of microplastic and nanoplastics. And then most often this comes from food and then water and other liquids. And this microplastic exposure occurs irrespective of sex, and age of the human being. It can be from babies. Babies actually get more exposure because we use a lot of plastic related materials and packaging. And then the examples of microplastics generation is a bit scary. If you see around your home and offices, you are sitting in the middle of plastic exposure. So starting from your paint and fabrics and the clothes you wear, adhesives, electronics, and biomedical appliances, and tire wear particles, all are actually microplastics, and it is generating every second as we speak. And this problem of microplastic is not just particle, it's not just plastic. It also contains chemicals. And these chemicals are already classified as potentially carcinogen, and some of them proven carcinogen. And the second point, this plastic can absorb pathogens as well, and these pathogens persist beyond disinfection. So that's my brief background on microplastic.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention the statistic that's a popular one. I think it's been around for a couple of years now, about how we ingest about 5 grams of plastic per week on average. That came from Dr. Thalva's research. Just a little side note there. So we'll go back to you, Rebecca, and we want to know what are some of the actions that households and communities can take specifically to reduce plastic consumption and waste?
I mean, we've seen from the Plastic Free July campaign that we know through our research that people really care about this issue. So we are very much focused on sharing solutions and also sharing stories. And so as people have made changes in their own lives through switching to reusables, choosing unpackaged produce, making changes in their bathroom, switching from liquid soap to bar soap, or reusable menstrual products or bamboo toothbrushes. The changes, I think, that I think we've done really well at some of the changing behaviour around some of the lower hanging fruit, the remembering our water bottles, the switching to reusable shopping bags. I think as we start to try and take the next steps, the fact that in many places people don't have access to bulk food stores, or if they do, they're not at a price point that's affordable, or people don't have time to shop in various different places so that they can avoid their packaging. But really, this behaviour change campaign that we run is focusing on not just a few people being perfect. I'm not plastic free myself, but we probably reduced the plastic in our household by about 60%, and lots of people making small steps and changes at the same time is what has an impact. So we know there was 2.7 million Australians that took part in Plastic Free July this year, and were reducing their household waste and recycling by over 4%. And together, over the last 5 years, participants have avoided 1.4 billion kilos of plastic. So that's more than the world's cleanups combined. So this behaviour change does make a difference, and we always encourage people just to start where they are, look in their bins, and choose one or two things they're going to tackle. And increasingly, we're seeing communities that are taking action on particular items. It might have been straws, it might have been plastic bags. Increasingly, a lot of community groups, organisations and businesses are focused on tackling the single-use coffee cup and making changing behaviours in workplaces through having reusable cups available, or we see cafes that are having reuse schemes in place, whether that's it's something informal like a mug library, or a formal kind of reusable cup scheme. But these, again, these changes that we're seeing are coming very much from a grassroots level. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it takes resources, whether that's money, whether that's people's time, and it is often happening from those people that are champions out in the community. And I feel like so much of our focus is still on recycling. So much of our government funding is at that. It's not about turning off the tap and reducing this problem at the source. It's about investing in recycling and investing in cleanups, not actually investing in waste avoidance. And I think the whole, you know, the big issue that we're now facing at the consumer level is that packaging piece, and seeing lots of comments in the chat there around the collapse of REDcycle and the challenge of soft plastics, which I think is a really big challenge we have ahead of us.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. The focus, for whatever reason, has been heavily on recycling, not reducing, or not reducing in addition to recycling, which is kind of baffling. So Deborah, we'll move over to you. And how can we have a more nationally harmonized and efficient system for plastics recovery and recycling in Australia?
Yes, and that's a really good point, the discussion around harmonisation, because we do have, you know, several different states and jurisdictions right around Australia. There's and legislation around waste management at that level can be very different because it comes in at different points in time. It happens with different parties, and even though there are lots of measures to have that conversation happening across different jurisdictions with forums, you know, for example, like the Environment Ministers meetings, inevitably we do get differences in the way that that legislation is written up in the different areas. And so we can see now a situation where in March 2024, we'll have single-use plastic, single-use coffee cups being legislated out of use in WA, which is a really big step. And then in South Australia, a bit later in the year, but the other states are still in earlier stages of discussion. If we go back to some earlier legislation around single-use plastics, that all came in at different times and with different lists of items that were banned. So some common ones being the disposable plastic bags under 37 microns, plastic disposable cutlery, plates, straws. So there's some commonality, but again, quite a few differences. So I think having forums where the different states, when they're developing that legislation, can learn off the others, where there's good experience and where things have worked well, I think that will create more harmonisation. That there's also, I think, good learning that Australia can collectively glean from the experiences internationally. We know that the International Standards Organisation are developing a suite of standards around the circular economy. Australian Standards Institute has standards around circular economy that they're looking at as well. So we can go back to single reference points because it's such a, you know, the circular economy and circularity of plastics uses quite often a lot of technical language, and it's a very complex system. So I think where we can go back to standard processes and commonality of understanding, I think that's where we can really make good advances without different parties perhaps interpreting information differently and developing either approaches or policies that might be heading in different directions. So I think a combination of having good forums for information exchange, both on a technical and a policy level, but also referencing standards and agreed taxonomies and definitions wherever that's possible.
Okay, fantastic. So we're running out of time slightly, but we'll try and get through the remaining questions before we put it to the audience. So Thava, what are your thoughts on recycling versus eliminating plastic use? And what, in your opinion, is a better alternative and why?
Good, $1 billion question, Nina. I would like to echo Rebecca's point, undertaken to reduce, reuse, and recycle plastics. And if they tackled in right way, these efforts have the potential to contribute to reducing the plastic waste and plastic spread in the environment. However, reusing, recycling of plastic can also lead to some of the unintended, like endocrine disruptors and other carcinogenic compounds present in the plastic. And these can be released during the reuse and accumulate during the recycling. And in this way, plastic reuse and recycling become a vector for spreading chemicals of concern. And this is especially concerned when plastics are reused for food packaging or when the food packaging is made with recycled plastics. So it is utmost important that care is taken to avoid hazardous chemicals in, especially in plastic food contact materials, and in the audience, and I would ask how many of you believe or convinced that plastic is hazardous or contains chemicals and single-use plastic waste is a problem in the environment, then what makes us to think recycled plastic is going to be safe? That's a problem. In my knowledge, it's hard to create one for one bottle to one when you recycle. You have to compress and remodify the material. Sometimes they add even some of the virgin polymers. In that process, there is no way to remove the chemicals, and these chemicals are only sequestered. And we've been doing a couple of PhD theses on risk assessment of recycled plastic. And then I had to start from my own department that phase out plastic lunch boxes, because the data we presented really alarming. If you are looking at PFAS, if you are watching closely PFAS in recycled plastics and other chemicals, that's really alarming. So that's my point. So the recycling target has to be based on the risk involved with this, not because we have this much waste, we want to stuff it in the recycled material and then let it circulate in the community again.
Okay. And so Rebecca, what are some of the compostable alternatives to plastic, and are they actually viable solutions at this stage?
Yeah, I think it's, as we consider that, we need to kind of go back to first principles and the circular economy. And so I'm from Western Australia, and to speak to Deborah's point before about the single-use coffee cup. So in Western Australia, yes, the government is banning single-use cups that are lined with plastics and plastic lids. So it's targeting the litter issue, but not necessarily the bigger waste issue. And I think it's really important that, so what I'm just seeing here, I'm not seeing a shift to reuse. We're not seeing a shift in a wide-scale adoption of reuse schemes, or we are measuring some increase in people taking their own cups, but we're measuring that actually at a national level and not seeing that play out necessarily in some states stronger than others.
Sure.
But so we're seeing these bio cups and compostable cups, but most of them are being disposed of in public place bins or office bins, and we don't actually have the facilities to collect and to process that. FOGO systems are actually designed to process food and garden organics. They're not designed to process packaging.
Right.
So I think that whilst, arguably, if we're going to you've got two items, a plastic bag versus a paper bag ending up as litter, the plastic bag is going to do more harm. But, we're not actually, it's not getting us toward taking us a step in the direction of the circular economy. And at the heart of this, I think what the plastic problem is kind of showing us, and some of the alternatives that we're switching to, is that our consumption is increasing. I think it's 1.75 planet Earth's worth of resources that are being used per year. If you look at that in Australia, I think it's 4.5 planet Earth. So we actually need to be thinking about that waste hierarchy and a shift to really keeping materials in circularity. And, you know, I think that we need to actually take step up a level in this conversation and not just talk about banning single-use plastics and expect that we're going to tackle the problem there alone. We need to look at reuse targets. We need to look at extended producer responsibility and product stewardship so that this problem is being tackled at a design stage, and the organisations, the businesses that are profiting from this packaging, from the actual extraction and production and the manufacturing of plastics, are the ones that are actually paying for this for the waste that is being created, and taking responsibility across the whole life cycle. Otherwise, we're just shifting one problem to another.
Sure. Okay. And Deborah, we're going to go over to you. I'm afraid we're going to have to shorten our answers because we're running out of time. But what are your thoughts on recycling plastics as a way forward, as opposed to eliminating, you know, and phasing out altogether as the best option?
Yes, I think if we go to what's called the waste hierarchy, that's a really good guide. And it looks at waste avoidance as the highest priority and the most effective measure for creating impact, and then going to resource recovery where we can't avoid it, because we know that we still need to use these materials in a whole range of different important circumstances. So waste avoidance can be a whole range of approaches. We've talked about, you know, Rebecca's just mentioned reuse schemes, thinking about if we can actually avoid using that material in the first place. You know, is it actually necessary? So thinking where we can reuse materials in different business models, and being really creative about then recapturing those materials and keeping them in circulation for as much as possible. So it's very much most important to avoid waste, and then where we can't, do the resource recovery.
Okay. And finally, Thalva, will you be able to share with us very, very briefly, if you can, a summary of your thoughts on, you know, the Australian government's plastic waste reduction and recycling targets, but also, you know, last week was the third session of the negotiations on the UN Plastics Treaty in Nairobi. So if you can share with us your thoughts on that as well, that would be amazing.
Yeah, okay. I'll be quick. So first thing, the national targets, the 4 targets: 100% packaging being usable, reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2025. So as I mentioned before, 100% recycled plastics has to be decided based on its risk involved. It's not because we have too much waste, we want to put it back into the cycle. And especially in food and water contact situations, given that high chemical load. And the second thing, 70% of plastic packaging being recycled or composted by 2025. It is achievable if all waste is compostable. When I say compostable, I'm not supporting the chemical loader like PFAS coated materials, other toxic compostable materials, but genuinely certified compostable materials have the potential to support this initiative. And also the 50% average recycled content. Actually, government is pushing this agenda. It sounds good, but it's more harmful to the environment when you do it everywhere. You know, there has to be a standardized process. You know, what materials you can make in your recycled product. So if you are trying to make a cutting board out of recycled plastic, you know, there are several industries approached me to do risk assessment. I told them from the start, you don't need to do risk assessment, please stop it, because that has lots and lots of chemical load in it. So like that, there needs to be standardized process, what product we can make when we recycle. And come down to the Nairobi INC3, I was participating in all 3, and the third one was tough one as expected. And there's no easy way to get out of this big mess. But I would like to quote one of the golden sayings by Mahatma Gandhi. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight with you. That's INC3.
I love that summary.
Then then 4. Okay. So the delegate consensus has gone through some tough time, and I'm sure INC 4 and 5 will be the ultimatum.
Okay. We're looking forward to that. So I think we have to move over to audience questions real quick. And I love this first question by Jenny Cooper. And it says, would love to hear your views on putting pressure on plastic producers via legislation, maybe, to use other materials rather than dealing with the problem after it's been created. It seems that unless we address the source, the problem will never be solved. So I'm happy for anybody to take that.
Look, I completely agree, and I think that is what is many people, many countries and many organisations are trying to achieve at that global level through the Global Plastics Treaty. But what is becoming increasingly evident is there's a real divide between the majority of countries that wants strong binding global rules that have a high ambition and a low ambition, a smaller group of low ambition countries that are primarily countries that are producing the petroleum, the oil and gas, and the petrochemical companies producing countries. And I think unless we tackle that plastic production, it would just be you can ban one item and it'll just be used for other items.
Okay. So, Deborah, you did sort of answer this question previously, but every state has different recycling regulations. It's around harmonization, capacity, and ways of collecting waste. Wouldn't a federal level approach to waste be a strong starting point to address the issue?
I think that in combination, there's lots of potential to improve the current status. So there is, through the federal Environment Department, there's a lot of activity in the plastic space, as well as at the state levels, and as well as the local government levels, because that's really where a lot of municipal waste is collected. And there's lots of differences in the infrastructure, because that's where it's sort of handled at the ground level. So I think there's a lot of work that is happening to, I suppose, guide that harmonisation across the different jurisdictions that's happening at the federal level. And there is awareness of harmonisation being a big challenge for people to be able to practically recycle or, just manage our waste collectively as efficiently as possible. So there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained by harmonisation. Because of the ease of understanding, but also economies of processing for the businesses. So I think that's a transition where we're in, in the midst of, because this problem has been going on for, since the middle of the 20th century. The plastic use and the growth of waste overall has been, as was mentioned, has been growing exponentially, and it's only just now that really serious action and attention has been drawn to this problem. And so I think, these opportunities for optimization through improving the systems, through harmonization, there's awareness of them, and I can really see that transition to affect that harmonization, that's coming into play.
Okay, thank you for that. So there's a question here from Susan Creasy about what the panel's view is on energy from waste incineration of plastics. It's an interesting one. Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, I can start.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so energy from plastic being a petroleum-based product, yes, it contains energy. And then you are again continuing with the fossil-based fuel-based energy. And the other problem is the projects are enormously expensive. And then the byproducts are even more dangerous than plastics. So the technology readiness level and thoughtfulness has to be included when assessing it. And there are countries in Europe, they use plastics for winter heating and all, but that's a different technology. And there is an interesting technology coming up is focused on upcycling, using that same chemical recycling method or energy conversion and then convert back into a basic molecules. That's still in the I would say bench scale level, but that's kind of promising. But in energy intensive technologies such as pyrolysis and thermal conversion, we have to be careful that we are not creating a bigger mess than what we have. So, and which is achievable, because we can't underestimate the science and technologies in this age. And like Deborah mentioned, the plastic problem were always there, and it took many years to realize that it is coming to our plate. So we have to be careful on the technology, and then we have to do that due diligence on what other risk involved in it.
Sure. Okay. So I feel like we can't, go through the questions without talking about red cycle, because you just can't talk about plastic pollution in Australia without talking about red cycle. We have quite a few questions here. So someone's asking, they'd like to know if anyone is how people are dealing with the red cycle plastic catastrophe in an environmentally friendly way. And another question on red cycle is, people are asking for an update regarding the failed scheme and what we can do today to continue to segregate soft plastics for effective recycling. Because they feel like the red cycle failure has really hurt the perception that recycling is useful and that it works.
I'll just start by saying, I think the problem with any of these types of schemes being is firstly the fact that they're voluntary, and that to be successful, I really can't see any way for that to happen and actually collect the required, collect the material at scale without it happening under some form of extended producer responsibility. And one of the challenges is that unlike with the plastics that are collected under the container deposit schemes, there is actually a market for those materials, and particularly when PET or HDPE is going through CDS, that's a clean, high-value source, and it can go bottle to bottle. When we're talking about soft plastics, we're talking about a number of different types of plastics, a huge variety of additives, and a very low quality material that none of the actual producers and manufacturers of those products, they don't want it back. They don't want to use it again. So it's downcycling from the start. And as long as it's cheaper and easier to use virgin plastics than recycled plastics, I don't see us ever as a country being able to tackle this effectively at scale.
Sure.
Just to, I suppose, add a tiny bit more to that conversation, because I think the red cycle situation was so visible and affected so many people. I think it was a really interesting situation, because it actually highlighted the fragility of that part of plastics pathways in Australia. So at that point in time, Red Cycle was really the only scheme with major capacity to take those soft plastics, and then taking that out of the options for pathways for that type of waste really affected so many people who were using it, and showed that there were no other options. So in some ways, that has moved and accelerated that pathway, the development of that pathway. The federal government's Recycling Modernisation Fund is currently moving through a process around awarding funding for advanced technologies for a plastic stream, and they are specifically focused on difficult to recycle plastics such as soft plastics. So I think again, it's we've reached this point in time where there's so much attention and there's so much focus because there is so much need that we're at that transition point. So I think the conversation that we'll be having, 3 or 4 years from now, will be that opportunity to look back on the transitions that are, significantly underway at this point in time too.
Okay. So final question from Richard Bentley. Can any panelist nominate a retailer who has taken full responsibility for plastics packaging and products to ensure minimal or no plastic pollution escapes?
So I want to start on that.
Sure.
Nina.
Okay, thank you.
It's a very tough question,
Yeah.
and the responsibility is for everyone. See, unlike any other problem, plastic is a visible problem, and everyone is responsible, and starts from the first responsibility from the producer, whether they have responsibility or not, but it comes down to our community. So, being a father, I don't care the industry is doing anything or not. What I care is whether my son can have a plastic-free meal or plastic-free clothing. So that starts, and I have noticed few changes, not in a big corporate company. In a small level. I was traveling across Australia months ago, and in regional Australia, I'm seeing maybe they don't have access to that, easy plastic packaging waste, but in regional Australia, I'm able to see there's already options available and changes available, and actually some of the communities do not use that much plastics in the air, and in the shops, also coffee shops, and we always carry coffee cup, but there are cups, reusable cup. You can wash, use it and wash it. And there are things, I wouldn't say 100%, but it's going in right direction in some of the community level. That's why we must appreciate the champions of this, plastic pollution issues and advocates such as Rebecca, the plastic-free July, November, but July, whether you follow or not, but July is a mandate for plastic free. Every councils, every universities, every college is actually promoting, because community can do a lot of changes. If we again, I have to Gandhi, be the change you want to see in this world. So if you can't be the change, then you can't change like that. So that I'm seeing that effect, and also internationally, some of the poor economy countries actually, unfortunately, using a lot of single-use plastic, but then an effective ban actually pushing them back to where they come from. They're not actually alternative materials. It's not necessarily compostable plastic. There are other materials available. People are using it. For example, again, I'm in India now. I came yesterday and then participating in this seminar here. But every time I come here, I always, for my eyes, it's biased. I always look at plastic waste. But when you go to shop here, after plastic ban, you can't find carry bags.
Okay.
And you carry a big basket, all the vegetable one stop, no barcode stops. And then they sort it out and buy it. And I'm really happy to see that I'm not carrying any plastic waste with me when I go to shop. So like that, it starts from the community.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's it for the audience questions that we can handle. Thank you so much to everyone who has sent in questions. Unfortunately, we can't answer all of them. But what we will do is we will do a poll, because one of the questions that we sought to answer with this webinar is whether plastics recycling, endless plastic recycling, is another form of greenwashing. Now, we know that this is a very complicated topic. There's a lot of gray area, but let's see if I can successfully launch the poll, the 2-question poll. Okay. So the first question is, and panelists, feel free to answer if it's popping up on your screen as well, because you are also part of this. Is recycling just a form of greenwashing? Yes or no? Based on the vast information presented to us, different perspectives from our panelists. It's be interesting to see what people think, because
Sorry, Nina, we can't host, the host and panelists cannot vote, it seems.
oh, well, sorry, you're just gonna have to, yeah,
But
sorry about that.
we can show thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah. We'll do your own poll after. And the other question is, what's the best option for plastics resolution moving forward? And this is a multiple choice question. Is it recycling? Is it compostable alternatives? Or is it neither? In other words, we need more research in this area. This is interesting. Okay, we're gonna end the poll in 5, 4. If you haven't voted, please do it quickly. 3, 2, and 1. So we have, I'm going to share the results. Can everybody see that? So for the first question, is recycling just a form, another form of greenwashing? 59% said yes, and 41% said no. So we had 244 people participate in the polling. And with the second question, what's the best option for recycling plastic? What's the best option for plastic waste resolution moving forward? 18% said recycling, 51% said compostable alternatives, and 45% said neither. We need more research in this area. Those are very interesting results. So I'd like to put it to the panelists, just a show of hands. Let's do our own polling. How, out of the 3 of you, who feels that recycling is another form of greenwashing? I know that's such a very basic question and it's very complicated, but I mean, the issue is very complicated, but no one? That's what I thought. Okay, so what's the best option for plastics waste resolution moving forward? Do you feel, how many people, who feels it's recycling? Anyone? No. Compostable alternatives? And then neither. We need more research in this area.
I would say neither, but
yeah, I know
because it's more research. It's reducing and recycling.
Yeah.
And all the other
I think I think the panel would probably, and Dr. Thaba, speaking on your behalf, I think we recognise that it's a very complex challenge, and it's not ever a very simple sort of binary response.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. So there's a lot to explain as a panel. There's no simple yes or no question.
No,
say yes or no. There may be a lot of science behind, but yes, there is a lot of things to discuss and complicated topic. But there is a way forward that can be guaranteed. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, that concludes our polling. I think we have 1 minute left. Yay! I thought we were going to go over, but I think we can finish off the webinar. So, I mean, it's fair to say that, the desire, there's a universal soul cry to end plastic pollution, but unfortunately, that's not going to be resolved today, clearly. So, however, if you work in this is our call to action. So if you work in the recycling, elimination, or anything similar in these spaces, and by work, I mean research, serious advocacy, manufacturing, or anything similar, we'd like to hear from you. We'd like to hear about your expertise on how you think you can help the issue progress in meaningful ways. So email us at mail@australiainstitute.org.au, and in the subject line, just write Plastics Free Australia. And please give genuine recommendations and not just random stuff, because it'll get deleted. Just kidding. We love engaging with you. So send an email if you feel that you have something you can contribute to this conversation. As you know, we do a lot of research and reports in this area, and by next year, we want to be able to recommend policies to the government when it comes to plastics. So we'll wrap it up here. What a fantastic discussion from our panelists. Thank you again so much for joining and your amazing contributions. Rebecca Prince-Ruiz, Dr. Deborah Lau, and Associate Professor Thava Palanisamy. And thank you to everyone, all of you who joined this webinar today, and for your fantastic questions and your support. So make sure you subscribe to our podcast, Follow the Money, subscribe on iTunes or wherever you normally listen to podcasts. So on Tuesday, the 28th of November, we're going to be talking to Alan Kohler on The Great Divide, Australia's housing mess and how to fix it. So head to australiainstitute.org.au to register. So I hope that you carry on the rest of the week in great health and spirit. Thanks again for joining us. Bye.
Thanks for watching. Visit australiainstitute.org.au for all our latest research, commentary and analysis, as well as details for upcoming events and webinars.